विश्वतः नो भद्राः क्रतवो यन्तु विश्वतः नो भद्राः क्रतवो यन्तु विश्वतः भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्ददातु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Dr. S. Bhagavad-Pada's introduction to the Atmajnana Yajnas, the ultimate spiritual goal of the Hindus.
Self-knowing is Atmajnana. Put simply, Atma is the imperceptible inner self, and Jnana is profound understanding of our true self as the imperceptible inner self. This profound understanding, actually wisdom, is also referred to as realization. The mature form of this self-knowing is self-realization or moksha, which has always been and still continues to be the ultimate esoteric goal in the spiritual life of the Hindus. Paradoxically, however, it is also the subtlest non-goal in the sense that those actually reaching that goal will have an inherent difficulty in perceiving their attainment of this goal to be in the nature of a personal achievement. This situation is wholly different from our pursuit of all other goals in the spheres of artha and kama, for in these mundane spheres, the reaching of the goal invariably would tantamount to some enrichment of the individual self, whereas in self-realization there is implied a loss of the illusion of the individual self. Another peculiar fact is that this goal cannot be reached by the conventional means of seeking, for it is this very seeking which will act like a hindrance and prevent the reaching of the goal. For these reasons, it may be considered to be a subtle non-goal. Therefore, even serious spiritual seekers who have been conscientiously walking on the road of a traditional spiritual life, dharma, will initially find it hard to have a clear understanding of what it is and what it is not. Not only that, they may even possibly have some strange fear of the unknown moksha and a consequent erroneous understanding born of that fear. To dispel such misunderstanding, it will be proper for us to approach the old problem of Atmajnana and moksha anew through a comprehensive understanding based on the assimilation of the various essential principles from traditional sacred texts as well as from the teachings of many modern self-realized masters. Such a broad new understanding will moreover have the merit of being free of the taint of a narrowly circumscribed framework, a taint that usually arises when an approach is confined exclusively to one school of philosophic thought or limited by its insularity and allegiance to the teachings of only a single self-realized master. After all, we have got to bear in mind that in nature's ever-expansive way, different masters have always been manifesting on the stage of the world for throwing light on specific aspects of moksha for the benefit of specific kinds of seekers of moksha called mumukshus, only because in the course of an entire lifetime, a single master is usually able to throw into full relief no more than one or two specific aspects of those esoteric teachings.
Om Tadatma, Om Tat Brahma, Om Tat Vayu, Om Tat Sarvam.
What is the ground from which this ultimate goal springs?
From very ancient times, Because of man's never-ending mental conflicts and confusions, he has always sought an everlasting peace and understanding as a panacea for all his ills. A profound understanding that will at once put an end to all his travails and miseries, an everlasting peace that will annihilate his painful sense of separation from all life, animate as well as inanimate. Such an ultimate spiritual goal need not baffle us unduly. If we were to go by a long religious history, we may go so far as to say that this is something for which man could well have been even genetically programmed. It is a culminating milestone in his biological, physical, mental evolution that he is fated to cross, just as the entire species was genetically programmed to get beyond the well-known rudimentary milestone of puberty and sexual awakening. After all, historical recordings of this ultimate esoteric quest, which constitute an integral part of the religious and spiritual traditions of the various peoples of the earth, do exist, and they offer us substantial testimony that this too is very much a part of man's evolutionary destiny, even though in the present season of our human civilization it may appear to be somewhat of an esoteric nature. The Hindus and later Buddhists and even the Jains developed an obsession with this ultimate esoteric goal, as it appears to have held an irresistible fascination for their innate spiritual appetites. And these appetites in turn are probably rooted in the peculiar geographical positioning of the Indian subcontinent.
Liberation from all tyrannies in consciousness is moksha.
Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham.
They called this ultimate spiritual goal of man moksha, though it meant an all-pervasive liberation. Initially at least, it invariably manifested as a palpable freedom from every kind of tyranny in consciousness, a tyranny perpetrated by the notorious gang of demons or asuras, as they are called in Hindu mythologies. Of course, these have been well identified in the scriptures for thousands of years and represent the cosmic malevolent life energies which anyhow have no option but to coexist side by side with the cosmic benevolent life energies which have also been identified as the godly devas in ancient mythologies. Moksha, in the next stage, also ought to mean freedom from every kind of suffering that every demonic tyranny inevitably created. The tyrannies perpetrated by the asuras invariably resulted in every kind of painful and undesirable negative manifestations in consciousness, namely conflict and emotional confusion, fragmentation of consciousness, dissipative wallowing in the experiences of the past, or incessant daydreaming into make-believe futures, anger, utter insensitivity and violence, lust, greed, jealousy, hatred, cruelty, enmity, and every kind of perversity, etc. The end result was a very debilitating condition in consciousness, bereft of all vitality, with an almost continuous distortion in perception, to such an extent that sorrow, which was created by these illusions, becomes a tragic way of life for the species as a whole. Maya is the Hindu name given to these illusions of false perceptions in consciousness. The first important stride in the spiritual life ought to concern itself with the patient observation, study, and understanding of the perpetually ongoing conflict between the devas and asuras in our consciousness. The second stride ought to consist of becoming intimate with the demonic energies, the asuras, and then going on to pacify them so that they become deflated by a very non-judgmental observation of their activities and become rested and peaceful in this process. This again is another important stage in moksha. The mature form of moksha was found to be possible only when man discovered his true self or true nature, which was neither the body, nor his ego, nor even his consciousness, nor his learning, nor his capacities, but something entirely different, more in the nature of a sovereign divinity that was imperceptible and hidden away, and yet ruled the totality of man's life and the whole of creation.
Tattvamasi, inward discovery of the true self, is Atmajnana.
Tattvamasi. Tattvamasi.
The Upanishadic aphorism, Tattvamasi, means that if you could but tear asunder all the Mayic illusions, you would find that you are indeed one with that universal spirit, that sovereign divinity. That is, Tata stands for that sovereign divinity, Tvam stands for you, and Asi stands for our. For the Hindus, such an understanding and realization as to who we actually are, namely the imperceptible inner self, the Atma, has been the ultimate esoteric goal in their spiritual spheres of life called Dharma and Moksha. The seemingly impossible inward discovery or astounding irrevocable understanding or realization that the true nature of our self, which is represented in our languages by the first personal pronoun I, is the imperceptible inner self or Atma, is Atmajnana or self-realization. Jnana becomes irrevocable understanding or realization. The goal itself is of such inconceivable simplicity and subtlety that thought contemplating this mystery in the post-realization phase will no more have the old egoistic arrogance to perpetuate its own self-conceited activity. Rather, it is likely to suffer an introversion through a recoiling shock, abnegating itself spontaneously in this process and freeing itself naturally from the heavy burden of a nagging past as well as from the idle wanderings into a make-believe future.
Is there an appropriate season of time for moksha?
When there is not a single ray of hope on the horizon, when persistent failures have been staring us in the face, when sickness, old age or death are near at hand, when we have lost our cherished world through recurring blows of fate, when every cunning planning and thought has come to naught, when dishonor and disgrace are aplenty, that is probably the ripe time when the mumukshu in us will take birth, when the ultimate quest for moksha may become a burning question, a matter of life and death. On the other hand, if we would have travelled the spheres of Artha and Kama consciously and slowly, tasting one fulfillment after another, also one disappointment after another, then too we might have had a chance to suddenly ripen and make a spontaneous transition to the spiritual spheres of Dharma and Moksha, especially when some sudden life crisis was present to trigger off this transition. There is in fact no unique blueprint for graduating as mumukshus and truly embarking on the ultimate quest of moksha. This may happen in 100 different ways, though the natural season of time for it in the Hindu view of life is after 60, because it takes this long for Maya to substantially lose its bewitching hold on our consciousness and on our desire for sense gratification.
Many sages, teachings and sacred texts.
Akashat patitam toyam yata gacchati sagaram sarvadeva नमस्कारः केशवं प्रति गच्छति.
A number of Indian teachers and masters in the past had brought the Hindu teachings on moksha out into the world for the spiritual fulfillment of all mumukshus, regardless of their nationality, language, and culture. Some of them were traditionalists, sticking closely to the religious texts and never deviating from the classical interpretations, while others made an impact on the world as original, fearless, and therefore even radical teachers. Sri J. Krishnamurti and Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj are particularly striking examples of this latter class of teachers. And because these masters had directly realized who they were, they expounded the truth of realization as seemed proper to them, from their own profound realization, but never attempting or bothering to bridge the gulf between their own insights and teachings on the one hand and what the religious texts had to say on the other. And also in this whole process, decisively turning their backs on all previous traditional religious authorities. Still, another kind of self-abnegating sages like Sri Ramana Maharshi took all the trouble to explore into the ancient sacred texts in the post-realization phase and tested their own experience against what the sacred texts had to say about so unusual a realization. In this way, their teaching underwent refinement, perfection, and brought in line with the ancient teaching on moksha, a teaching that was the distilled essence of the realizations of countless sages in the long spiritual and religious history of the land.
Who are the so-called mumukshus?
From whatever has been said above, one may have the feeling that mumukshus may only be in very small numbers everywhere, even hard to find among the ubiquitous spiritual seekers. Upon closer examination, however, we may find a shockingly large number of seekers in our societies who may not have as yet successfully crossed a certain threshold of spiritual maturity, could well be trapped in a condition of spiritual stagnation. This arresting of the process of spiritual flowering could still be continuing to happen in our own day as a general concomitant of our all too materialistic approach to life. If a way out of this spiritual stasis is offered in convincing ways to those seekers whose spiritual growth has been arrested, there will certainly be the new possibility that large number of such seekers may actually suddenly graduate upwards as a current, becoming full-fledged mumukshus in this process. Where then are these potential mumukshus? They may be in any station in life, even sometimes among the young, but certainly in larger numbers among the older generation, especially those who are inwardly still very much alive, notwithstanding the chronological age of their bodies. In fact, all those who are looking for everlasting peace and understanding because of a series of blows of fate and endless sufferings in the wake of these blows, and who are therefore now feeling the urgency to know themselves with a view to end their long-standing suffering, are all potential mumukshus par excellence. The Atmajnana Yajnas, though intended for seasoned mumukshus, will also be rewarding for the potential mumukshus, simply because it will be an opportunity for them to spiritually graduate and ascend to the level of the seasoned ones.
The Master, Sri J. Krishnamurti's medicinal decoction of choiceless awareness.
In every age, authentic masters have always approached the problem of moksha in their own inimitable way. It is true that the Master Sri J. Krishnamurti never directly drew attention to the goal of moksha per se. Instead, he only sought to clear away the piles of debris of conflict in consciousness, the veiling obstacles created by the power of Maya, by avidya or real ignorance, or by ahankara or the individual demonic ego, through the very potent medicinal decoction of the choiceless awareness of what is. To him, this was true meditation, and even this could not be achieved because of the self-seeking will of a seeker, an imaginary individual. It just had to happen whenever the conditions for the same became favorable. He had always stressed the importance of learning about obstacles and becoming intimate with them, for in his view it was this that held the real key and could therefore open the door to freedom. Now, what indeed is this choiceless awareness? And secondly, what is this so-called what is? Our true self is actually timeless, and once we realize that we have always been irrevocably perched in this seat only, all that we are capable of doing is to be an unconcerned witness of every happening in consciousness, as well as every happening out there in the world. For Krishnamurti, this alone was meditation. It is easy to be poised here as the true self if the ceaseless effort of becoming, which has become our second nature, is renounced through wise understanding. To be an unconcerned witness is to be choicelessly aware. This also means we have given up our foolish and egoistic desires to improve ourselves. To be choicelessly aware, all we have to do is simply renounce the habit of pursuing an illusory self-improvement. Yes, illusory, because this so-called self-improvement never ever happens, as we sadly remain only the same old mediocre individuals that we have always been.
Choiceless awareness awakens intelligence, that is prajna.
Prajnanam Brahma Prajnanam Brahma Prajnanam Brahma Satyam Jnanamanantam Brahma Satyam Jnanamanantam Brahma Satyam Jnanamanantam Brahma Ayam Atma Brahma Ayam Atma Brahma Ayam Atma Brahma Ayam Atma Brahma Satyam Jnanamanantam.
In our starting conditions of Maya, Avidya and Ahankara, what is will be all the asuric or demonic goings-on in our consciousness, whereas when the light of choiceless awareness has illuminated all these asuric goings-on without the least sense of judgment, guilt, condemnation or suppression, then the asuras are, so to speak, laid to rest through a spontaneous deflation of their life energies. And once this cleansing happens and conflict has vanished, then what is will shine as prajna, or that new awakened intelligence at first, and also much later as para Brahma, the unmanifest and unknowable sovereign divine source.
Prajnanam Brahma.
Krishnamurti's medicinal decoction of choiceless awareness also implies the presence of the ingredient of detachment. For without this vital ingredient, the witnessing awareness will never acquire the pure quality of being choiceless. When ingested, this medicinal decoction of choiceless awareness leads automatically to the awakening of intelligence or prajna, provided firstly conflict has vanished through the non-judgmental acceptance of duality within ourselves, and secondly, as a consequence of the vanishing of all conflict, there also occurs the very important stilling of consciousness and a condition of consciousness being relatively empty and devoid of activity, but quiescent and poised in the timeless present. It will be worthwhile for us to remember at this stage that in Krishnamurti's view, all we may possibly do is only to keep the window open, for whether the breeze will actually come in or not is not certainly in our hands. It may come in if we are lucky, or it may not. For one in whom this prajna is awakened, his concomitant state of unperturbed equanimity will be so rock-like that this whole question of whether the breeze will come in or not will be quite meaningless to him, because he anyhow has no future which he has with self-interest architectured, and no aspirations either for the gratification of his petty self.
Prajahati yada kaman sarvan parthamanogatan atmanyevatmana tushta स्थितप्रज्ञस्तदोच्यते दुःखेषु अनुदिग्नमनाः सुखेषु विगतस्पृहः वीतरागभयक्रोधः स्थितधीर्मुनिरुच्यते.
The Sthita-prajna state of unperturbed equanimity.
This is the Sthita-prajna state of unperturbed equanimity, described so aptly in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. A Sthita-prajna is one in whom the awakened intelligence, prajna, has become steadily aflame and stabilized, that is, sthita. The meditative journey of the choiceless awareness of what is, followed by the abidance in I amness, culminates in the consolidation of the Sthita-prajna state of consciousness. And this is what I have identified as part 1 of the sadhana, spiritual practice, for knowing, discovering, and even being the imperceptible inner self, the Atma. The Master, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj's medicinal decoction of abiding in the I amness.
यत् परं सकलवागगोचरं गोचरं विमलबोधचक्षुषः शुद्धचित्घनमनादिवस्तु यद् ब्रह्मतत्त्वमसि भावयात्मनि.
It has been made abundantly clear by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj between the years 1897 to 1981 in his satsangs that as moksha is not anything which can be grasped by our intellects or our customary mental activities, there is absolutely nothing our intellects can possibly do by way of sadhana as a mental effort to get at moksha except to have that irrevocable understanding. The reason is that through their ceaseless involvement in one kind of mental activity or the other, all they can possibly do is to sustain this ceaseless activity, and as such activity is the very mechanism of the veiling force of Maya which prevents us from knowing who we really are. No sadhana which implies an activity in consciousness can be a fruitful means in the quest for this realization. So, like all true Advaitic masters, this master too negates the activity of thought and asks us to just sink in and abide in the state of I amness, which is just the simple and pure feeling of being, in contrast to our incessant becoming, which is ever fraught with every kind of mental activity. In this master's perception, as I amness is the portal extremely proximate to Parabrahma, the unmanifest and attributeless sovereign divinity, our being poised at this portal, bereft of all ulterior motives, is the best we may possibly accomplish by way of a sadhana, and it is important to note that even this is more in the nature of an inaction and negation rather than any positive action or activity that may be inspired by self-seeking in howsoever subtle a form. After Krishnamurti's medicinal decoction has resulted in the slowing down of thought and later even in the relative stilling of mental activity, at that stage, it will be relatively easy to drink the draught of the more potent medicine that Sri Maharaj is recommending as a means to our realization. If, of course, one undertakes this sadhana even with the slight contamination of some desire or ulterior motive or sense of agency that one is doing something, then one is finished. One loses all spiritual merit in the process. Abidance in I amness has to be motiveless for it to be truly spiritually pure, meritorious and fruitful. In Maharaj's view, nothing more is necessary than abidance in I amness, because according to him, once this happens, and this is actually what people on the bhakti path call surrender, Parabrahma will get us, rather than we questing for Parabrahma through an act of extroverted seeking.
ब्रह्मतत्त्वमसि भावयात्मनि.
Sri Ramana Maharishi's medicinal decoction of Atma Vichara.
The spiritual inner inquiry into this unusual and rather unheard of question of who we really are is Atma Vichara. Vichara meaning inquiry. In the last century, worldwide spiritual attention was drawn to this spiritual philosophical question by Sri Ramana Maharishi between the years 1879 to 1950, after this self-realization just happened to him one fine day, suddenly and most unexpectedly, without his ever having sought after this illumination. Hindu sacred texts consider such illumination to be the highest blessing and call it moksha, meaning liberation. By this was meant liberation from the Maya, that is ignorance, that one is the body, or from the Maya, that one is the consciousness or the ego, etc. In the Maharshi's view, one way to approach Atmajnana was through the sustained inquiry into the whole question of who we really are. So he enjoined Atmavichara to mumukshus as a means to Atmajnana or self-realization. The Maharshi was just one but a particularly illustrious example of the long line of succession of great sages from the Hindu world who were fortunate enough to secure this highest blessing of self-realization. The other endlessly creative and illustrious progenitor in the Hindu world on this path of Atmavichara and Atmajnana was Adi Shankaracharya, recognized also to be one of the founding fathers of Hinduism, 8th century Christian era.
Om Satchidananda Parabrahma Purushottama Paramatma Shri Bhagavati Sameta Shri
The Master, Sri Bhagavan's medicinal decoction of the Bhagavad Gita and the Hindu spiritual ethos.
In my life, the first 5 medicinal decoctions have been drawn from the following sources. Firstly, from the ancient Hindu spiritual ethos, the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads given to me as a very potent initiation in boyhood days itself between the years 1963 to 1967 by the beloved Master Sri Bhagavan. Secondly, from the Master Sri J. Krishnamurti's choiceless awareness as meditative seeing, again initially seeded into my consciousness between the years 1966 to 1970 by the beloved Master Sri Bhagavan. Thirdly, from the abidance in I amness of the Advaitic Master Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. This was a discovery I came upon in 1994. Fourthly, from the Atmavichara of Sri Ramana Maharishi. Again, I was introduced to Sri Ramana Maharishi by Sri Bhagavan in 1964. And fifthly, the medicinal decoction of Jyotisha or Vedic astrology that fully manifested for me in 2000 through the work of the Jyotishis, Professor V.K. Chowdhury, Pandit Vamadeva Shastri and several others. After having ingested the 5 medicinal decoctions, in the way they came into my life, and after having internalized, understood and realized the same in my life, these Atmajnana Yajnas emerged as an expression of my realizations.
The place of the Bhagavad Gita as a moksha shastra.
Yas sarvatra anabhisnehas tattat prapya shubha shubham nabhinandati nadveshti Dhasya prajna pratishtita.
The Bhagavad Gita was introduced to me by the beloved Master Sri Bhagavan in 1966 and 1967, probably with a view to seed into my consciousness a comprehensive Hindu worldview that the Gita so eminently provided. Those potent seeds of initiation turned into a prodigious tree of my realization after I turned 60. There are many learned commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita already, and so the question naturally arises whether any additional new commentary is now called for. These Atmajnana Yajnas are not certainly commentaries in the traditional sense, for I bring the Bhagavad Gita alive in an entirely new way as a moksha shastra. This will be evident to us as the Atmajnana Yajna unfolds part by part.
Jyotisha in this approach as the 5th medicinal decoction.
Omkaram बिन्दुसंयुक्तं नित्यं ध्यायन्ति योगिनः कामदं मोक्षदं चैव ओंकाराय नमो नमः.
In this new approach, Jyotisha, that is Vedic astrology, also provides another Hindu medicinal decoction that has the potency to dispel the demons in man's consciousness, demons such as Maya, Avidya, Ahankara, and a whole host of other kindred ones. I had been studying Vedic astrology for 12 years, moving rather unsuccessfully and restlessly back and forth many a time between the classical astrological works in the Hindu world and the works of modern Jyotishis like Pandit Vamadeva Shastri and several others. For I was in search of a self-consistent and comprehensive understanding of Jyotisha as a Vedic discipline of learning. All too suddenly, when I stumbled upon the system's approach to Hindu astrology founded by Professor V.K. Chowdhury, masses of pervasive black clouds of confusion were instantaneously dispelled, leaving me in a profound state of learning and seeing to such a remarkable extent that for me, verily, Jyotisha now began to serve me as a third eye. It has given me a new darshana or worldview of which moksha is an integral part. Broadly, two traditional paths to moksha, the path of bhakti and the path of jnana.
In the Vedic or Hindu spiritual tradition, there are available two distinct paths suitable to mumukshus of two widely different temperamental inclinations. The path of devotion or bhakti, in which the object of devotional adoration is the formful aspect of Ishvara, referred to as Saguna Brahman or God with auspicious attributes, and the path of enquiry and understanding, in which the object of enquiry and understanding is the unmanifest, attributeless and formless sovereign divinity, that is Nirguna Brahman. The exoteric path of bhakti takes ultimate reality to be God or Ishvara as we can conceive him in our deluded state of duality, in which the taints of avidya, maya and ahankara are all admittedly present. In this path, God or Ishvara is conceived as an almighty external power set apart from ourself, which we erroneously considered to be petty and puny. It is understood that one's supposition that one is the body or the manas, or that ahankara is permitted on this path, for so long as maya and avidya remain, how can these perceptions ever vanish? And naturally then, God becomes a perceived almighty sense object, or at any rate a sacred object in the eyes of the subject, the devotee. Its culmination is God realization of frequent mystic communions with God as an ultimate reality, but different from our petty self. Wholly different from this populist stream of bhakti and duality is the esoteric path of jnana or self-knowing, self-realization, atma-vichara and atmajnana, in which, as there is no scope for duality right from the very inception, ultimate reality can only be the formless Parabrahma, which is also our imperceptible inner self, rather than any external, almighty power highly appealing to our limited sense perceptions. Dr. S. Bhagavad-pada's Atmajnana Yajna in Mexico City. This is ideal as a self-paced Atmajnana Yajna at home. After 12 years of Antarmukha,
in 2011, Bhagavad-pada, yielding to a new inner inspiration, moved away from his erstwhile long period of 12 years of withdrawal, solitude and contemplative study. This spiritual phenomenon of withdrawal from the world, followed by a subsequent return to it, is well known in both Eastern as well as in the Christian as also in other religious traditions. For without such a protracted withdrawal from an active life in the outer world of sensory perceptions, earnest seekers may not find it easy to come upon that final astounding understanding or inward discovery called self-realization or Atmajnana.
The learning and teaching pilgrimage in 2012
In September 2012, he embarked on a new learning and teaching pilgrimage for seeing and understanding the ethos of mundane and spiritual life of the Western world, for knowing the nature of their spiritual quest, and for learning from their spiritual traditions, their modern masters and the institutions they founded, etc. In this process of learning from the West, it was also his sankalpa to share his own spiritual realizations and understanding with kindred mumukshus in the West, whenever such opportunities would arise for him, without his having to exert himself unduly to seek them out.
Atmajnana in Latin America, invited and organized by Ricardo Bravo.
Through a remarkable unforeseen coincidence, as though Bhagavad Pada's sankalpa was already in the years of the Parabrahma, he received an invitation from Ricardo Bravo, a spiritual leader in Latin America, to conduct Atmajnana Yajnas in both Punta del Este, Uruguay, as well as in Mexico City in Mexico. During this September-October 2012 pilgrimage, he was also offered the opportunity to hold satsangs or spiritual gatherings and provide a number of personal Jyotish consultations not only in Toronto, Canada, but also in Punta del Este and Mexico City for deepening and broadening the new understanding seekers had already secured in his Atmajnana Yajnas.
Ricardo Bravo's spiritual work in Latin America.
The Atmajnana Yajnas were organized by the spiritual leader Ricardo Bravo from Chile, founding director of Oneness Flower, an organization dedicated to the practice and dissemination of tools for personal and spiritual development in Latin America. He had received Upadesha, that is spiritual teachings, as well as practical training in Eastern methodologies for self-knowledge, health, and quality of life by the Foundation for World Awakening, USA, and also directly from Sri Bhagavan, the founder of Oneness Spiritual Movement. He has taught courses in these areas in Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, Mexico, USA, Spain, Denmark, and Hungary since 1997. Today he is devoted to the teachings and dissemination of the ancient Vedic systems of knowledge through the Oneness Flower Academy.
Ricardo's magical Spanish translation of the Yajna.
Ricardo Bravo had already become deeply familiar with the darshana, that is worldview, and Atmajnana teachings that Bhagavad Pada desired to deliver in those countries through intense email dialogues with him in the preceding several months ever since the beginning of 2012. Because of this deep familiarity, his intelligence, sincerity, and single-minded dedication, Ricardo acquired the rare intuitive gift of being able to instantaneously translate Shankara's discourses into Spanish. The efficacy and intelligibility of this almost magical Spanish translation was spectacularly evident in the very fruitful and bountiful number of questions with which the seekers spontaneously came up during every hour of the unfolding discourses.
Supporting teams and hosts in Punta del Este and Mexico City.
In the city of Punta del Este, Ricardo Bravo was ably assisted by his two co-organizers, Juan Pablo Diaz and Silvia Vila. Analia Suarez came forward to help Ricardo's mission by firstly graciously hosting Shankara Bhagavad Pada and Kannan Subramanian, and secondly by putting her ethereal AWA hotel at his disposal for making the Atmajnana Yajna a pleasant experience. Joachim Hue also warmly offered his selfless services. In Mexico City, Ricardo Bravo was ably assisted by a number of seekers who had been inspired by him. His main organizers were Gabriel Vidal and Monica Gutierrez, while Maggie Haddad graciously hosted Shankara, Kannan, and Ricardo in her own palatial home. She also spontaneously and warmly offered her premises for holding the Atmajnana Yajna. There were other teammates who offered either very valuable technical support or selfless service. Sebastian, Elvira, Marco, Roselba, Pipe, Hume, Pipe, Humberto, and Alnur.
Kannan Subramanian.
Kannan Subramanian, who has been offering his selfless services to Shankara Bhagavad Pada in the course of more than 20 years, accompanied him on this learning pilgrimage to North and South America. In the very beginning, he is seen reading the invocatory prayers before Ricardo Bravo begins to translate the prayers into Spanish.
Atmajnana Yajna intended for mumukshus.
This Atmajnana Yajna comes as a set of 14 DVDs. The Yajna is conducted in the English language, but for those who wish to listen to the Spanish translation, all they need to do is to press the audio button in the DVD remote. It is intended primarily for mumukshus. Such mumukshus go after moksha in the same way and with the same intensity as worldly people go after wealth, name or fame.
What is expected of the mumukshus?
No previous knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita or of the teachings of the masters Sri J. Krishnamurti, Sri Ramana Maharishi and Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj is assumed. But if some seekers have walked on one or more of these paths of self-knowing or self-realization, that will definitely be a decided advantage. No previous knowledge, because here a systematic understanding of Atma and Moksha is built up from first principles, so that all that the seeker has to do is to think and feel along the lines suggested by this teacher at every unfolding moment in the yajna. Indeed, the mumukshus must be capable of deep listening, thinking and contemplating. As the mumukshu is one who has given his heart to this quest, these appear to be reasonable expectations.
Goals of the yajna.
The goals of this Atmajnana Yajna are self-knowing, inner contentment and finally self-realization. Bhagavad Pada's approach in these yajnas is to sequentially administer to our distraught and deluded consciousness in a meticulously structured manner different permutations and combinations of basically 5 very potent Hindu medicinal decoctions, which are actually potent teachings, for understanding, dispelling and laying at rest the various demons of Maya or primordial delusion, of avidya or ignorance, of ahamkara or sense of individual self, and many other kindred ones such as greed, lust, avarice, jealousy, hatred, violence, killer instinct, etc. Demons because they distort our true perception and spiritually blind us by projecting truth as illusion as truth. The arduous process of self-knowing would consist of our becoming first of all aware of these demonic energies in our thought, word, deed and in life circumstances as well. And we have to know ourselves in this way without sitting in judgment, without projecting ideals, without wishing to get rid of these demons, without being ashamed of them and without feeling a sense of guilt because of their very presence, etc. This is indeed the very first goal of the yajna. As awareness transcends these demons, abiding in awareness may be the sure and only means to understand these demons and thereby withdrawing their life energy so that they spontaneously exhaust their life energies and thus give up their demonic activities.
Structure and content of the yajna.
He presents the yajna in 7 parts, spanning some 14 DVDs running for 14 hours, with the present introductory audio CD running for about an hour. In every part he explains the etymology of the important Sanskrit vocabulary, which he systematically introduces at every stage and then goes on to throw new light on the sutras, showing how a mumukshu may work his or her way to moksha, lest Westerners and newcomers to Sanskrit should feel discouraged. He emphasizes that a knowledge of Sanskrit per se is not really important or necessary, but that it is much more important to grasp and internalize this self-realization teaching, which is presented in English first and then translated into Spanish. He also relies on Hindu mythic pictures and symbols to appeal to our intuitive right hemisphere. Each sutra in the Gita is clearly brought alive with rich content and meaning, approaching the same from the point of moksha. so as to make it easy for us to then and there discover its stunning pertinence and utility in our daily spiritual life. He uses no more than 20 sutras from the Gita in all the 7 parts. In chapter 2, he relies on the sutras 23, 24, 25, 29, 58, 67 and 70. In chapter 6, he relies on the sutras 5, 6, 34 and 35. In chapter 7, he uses the sutras 14, 16 and 27. And in chapter 13, he uses the sutras 7, 8, 12, 15, 16 and 22. The 7 parts of the Yajna went in this order. Part 1, Introduction to Tattvamasi and Atma. Part 2, Recognizing Maya and duality and overcoming the same. Part 3, Pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses from their sense objects. Part 4, Understanding Atma Tattva. Part 5, Perfection in the understanding of Atma Tattva. Part 6, Realizing the already existing connection to the unmanifest divine. Part 7, Summing up, Thanksgiving and the road beyond. Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana and Samalochana.
अग्निर्मे वाचि श्रितः वाग्हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि वायुर्मे प्राणे श्रितः प्राणो हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि सूर्यो मे चक्षुतः चक्षुर्हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि चन्द्रमा मे मनसि श्रितः मनो हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि दिशो मे श्रोत्रे श्रिताः श्रोत्रगुं हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि आपो मे रेतसि श्रिताः रेतो हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि पृथिवी मे शरीरे श्रिताः शरीरगुं हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि ओषधी वनस्पतयो मे लोमसु श्रिताः लोमानि हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि इन्द्रो मे बले श्रितः बलगुं हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि पर्जन्यो मे मूर्ध्नि श्रितः मूर्धा हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि ईशानो मे मन्यो श्रितः मन्युर्हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि आत्मा आत्मनि श्रितः आत्मा हृदये हृदयं मयि अहममृते अमृतं ब्रह्मणि पुनर्म आत्मा पुनरायुरागात् पुनः प्राण पुनराकूतमागात् वैश्वानरो रश्मिभिर्वावृदानः अन्तस्तिष्ठत्वमृतस्य गोपाः
Hindu tradition on the path of Jnana lays down that the first step or beat of Atma Vichara has to be Shravana, which is an initial, careful listening to the truth with undivided attention. This will be possible in the first instance only when all prejudice has been set aside and all chattering in consciousness has subsided. This first beat of Atma Vichara must be followed by the second beat of Manana. What indeed is this Manana? It is simply clear thinking for oneself and thinking with feeling, and also feeling the truth which has been listened to so that one is convinced and one no more has any doubts. By implication, believing blindly or investing one's faith in a theory or principle and following masters, however erudite, convincing or self-realized they may be, will not constitute manana. This second beat must in turn lead to the third, more mature beat of nididhyasana, which is deep, contemplative meditation on what has been already thought about, so that an internalization comes to pass, and this must be understood to be in the nature of a perfect understanding, which is in fact realization. Without graduating through these three steps or beats, the fruit of jnana cannot be realized. In every part of the yajna, Bhagavad-pada has added a rewarding and culminating fourth beat, namely samalochana, which is a process of thinking, discussing, sharing and reflecting together, as this seemed natural to him in the context of the yajnas. All hungry seekers are likely to find astounding answers to many of their long-standing perplexing questions during these samalochana sessions.
Parts 1 and 2 in the path of jnana, path of understanding.
He selected only some 20 potent sutras from the Gita to get his teaching across. According to him, the vast majority of seekers on the path of moksha would have to go through two distinct parts. In the first part, on the path of jnana, there has to be an awakening to suffering and the consequent purgation of it, or the dying to it in the sense meant by Sri J. Krishnamurti. He says that if this happens successfully, then prajna or intelligence is awakened, and that this prajna which has come into manifestation will not rest till it successfully resolves the equation between the true self of man and the unmanifest sovereign divinity, Parabrahma. So, the pursuit of Parabrahma, the inquiry into Parabrahma by the awakened prajna, will constitute the second and the final part on the path. The Atmajnana Yajna shows the path of jnana leading to moksha for those diligent mumukshus who are inclined to walk on this path. Throughout the yajna, in several places, Bhagavad-pada repeatedly emphasizes that there are innumerable paths to understand and realize the unity with the divine. So, for this reason, he time and again stresses that we should walk on a path that is naturally suitable to our spiritual inclinations, and asks us to explore and discover which among these is our natural path, and urges us to start walking on that path in all earnestness. In his view, this meditative journey to moksha through the four beats of Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana and Samalochana in every helical cycle of Atmajnana is something which each mumukshu has to himself or herself consciously inwardly seek, yet also very subtly and non-willfully, because this goal is in a sense also a non-goal, for the initial seeking is itself only a wrong beginning. So it has to burn itself out eventually, just as the goal itself has to burn itself out. Surprisingly, he takes the rather encouraging stand that even if mumukshus reach only the sthita prajna state of unperturbed equanimity, which means that only sadhana in part 1 has been successfully completed, while the authentic discovery and the total devotional anchorage to Nirguna Parabrahma has not yet happened, which means that part 2 of the sadhana is still left unfinished, it must still be deemed a blessing of untold value. Atmajnana as a self-paced yajna at home.
For restless mumukshus who are still in search of that light which they themselves truly are, this well-structured Atmajnana Yajna in 7 parts can be an absorbing, self-paced home study course that will give confidence and enormous clarity, probably for the first time in their lives, so that they may now resume their quest for moksha from that point where they had left off because of a lack of conviction or lack of clarity and understanding.
Dr. S. Bhagavad-pada's background.
In his younger years, he was a researcher in theoretical nuclear physics, doctoral research from TIFR Mumbai from 1971 to 1979, then an Alexander von Humboldt researcher in Germany from 1980 to 1982. These were also meditative and introspective years when he slipped into the Sthita Prajna state of unperturbed equanimity. He was deeply involved in the commencement of the mission work of his master, Sri Sri Bhagavan, in the inceptional stages, and was the Paramacharya for that movement during the years 1995 to 1999, before he went into Antarmukha, namely withdrawal, solitude and contemplative study. The spiritual name Shankara Bhagavad-pada was given to him by his master, Sri Sri Bhagavan, in 1991. And through these Atmajnana Yajnas, shows a way for mumukshus to build their spiritual life in the spheres of dharma and moksha. In his first published work, Sri Ramana Maharishi's Moksha, he has broken new ground in the interdisciplinary field of Jyotisha in the spiritual spheres of dharma and moksha. He is also currently teaching a self-paced course in Vedic astrology, that is Jyotisha, to a number of individual seekers through email lessons. Presently, he lives in the outskirts of Chennai with his wife and daughter and offers consultations in Jyotisha. His websites www.hinduworldastrology.net and www.tattvamasi.org. Om Tat Sat.
Tat Sat. Tat Sat.